The story of the Akedah, of the binding of Isaac, is indispensable to Rosh Hashanah. It's not only the second day's Torah reading, but it's the reason we choose the horn of a ram over that of any other animal to be our shofar. We also have it in our liturgy. In our prayers, we reminded God of it again and again as an example of our ancestors' merit and faith. And we ask that God overcome God's stern judgment in favor of mercy, just as Avraham Avinu overcame his mercy, his rachamim, in order to fulfill the divine command to sacrifice his son. But we cannot dismiss our own feelings about the story, or more to the point, our own judgment of the story. Some of us see this story in the traditional way, what you could call the traditional way since there's more than one, as a story of heroic devotion to God above all else. A story of tremendous faith that whatever God ordains must be for the best. Others look at the command to sacrifice Yitzchak as cruel, and so see God as unworthy of worship because of it. Others see Avraham as having failed the test, not passed it. How could Avraham not have known for himself that to traumatize Yitzchak and Sarah at the very least, and even more likely to shed innocent blood, even that of his own son, was the deepest kind of moral wrong imaginable? He should have known better than to obey. Still, others blame Yitzchak for not protesting. He went literally like sheep to the slaughter. And still, he is praised for his willingness to give up his own life before the divine will. Neither the view that Avraham passed the test of faith and that they're to be praised for their faith and devotion, nor the idea that the Akedah was a cruel, base, and immoral test can be dismissed. We need to find a place for this story in our religious imagination. We have, at the base of the story, and these different attitudes towards it, two different forms of morality. On the one hand, we have a morality that defines the good as what is commanded by God. The other is a humanistic morality that tells us that human life has ultimate and infinite value. And if we look closely at the Akedah, we see it bringing both of these moralities together. The story at its beginning is one of unquestioning obedience of God and unwavering faith in the ultimate goodness of God. Avraham rises early in the morning and saddles his donkey. The rabbis see this as proof that he just got up immediately without a moment's hesitation, went to fulfill a mitzvah. He sets out immediately to carry out the command. The end of the story teaches the value of human life. Al tishlach et yadcha al hana'ar va'al ta'as lo me'uma. Don't send your hand against the boy and don't do anything to him. God stops Avraham from slaughtering his son and provides a ram in Yitzchak's place. This is consistent with the places in the Torah where we are commanded never to sacrifice our children as other nations perform their abominations, sacrificing their children to Molech or to Baal Peor. But did Avraham pass or fail the test? God praises him and rewards him for it afterwards, but it seems that the man who pleaded, "Shall the judge of the earth not do justice, hashofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat," on behalf of Sodom and Amorah, should have done the same for his own son, not because of his feelings towards him, but because of his ethical obligations towards him. How can we understand the praise that God gives him afterwards? It may be that Avraham may have broken from his father's tradition of idol worship, but only partially. He knew that the idols were false gods, and he did seek a higher truth, but the same paradigm of what a god is stayed with him from his childhood. A god was a higher being to him, to whom all obedience and sacrifice is due, even that of one's own children. He failed to realize that a higher service of God was to see his son not as an extension of himself, but as an individual in his own right. It is only because he saw Yitzchak as his son, his heir, the one he loved, that he thought it a selfless and faithful act to offer him up as a sacrifice. Had he understood that the self-determination and individuation that he achieved by leaving his land and his home and his father's house, Lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladecha u'mibeit avicha, that these were the birthrights of his son as well, he would have known better than to obey the command to slaughter him, and God would never have tested him in this way in the first place. As it is, the Akedah tells the story in such a way that Abraham's process of lech lecha, of leaving home, is incomplete. To truly stand before the divine, Abraham needed to know that about himself. And then his service of God would have been more perfect, or closer to perfect. But he was a human being, like us. And as such, even his lech lecha, the paradigmatic lech lecha, was incomplete. His son suffered as a result. God was known as Magen Avraham, the shield of Abraham. But God is also known as Pachad Yitzchak, the terror of Yitzchak. The shofar is bent like our hearts as we wrestle with our own imperfection. This is what the Talmud tells us, why we use our bent ram's horn. And the effects of our imperfections on those closest to us. Its sounds are the cries that we let out as we realize how much we need to repair in ourselves. We hear the long wailing tekiyah, the groaning shavarim, and the sobbing teruah of Abraham's and Yitzchak's prayer, tears, and anguish as they stood before the divine. We are left knowing that if Avraham Avinu was imperfect in his service of the divine, so are we, and so will we always be. We might judge him a little less harshly, and even as we cry that our own imperfections have not been fully repaired, we may even judge ourselves a little less harshly, and take upon ourselves the task of teshuvah. May we all be inscribed in the book of life. Shana tova, v'tikatevu, gemar chatima tova, shana tova u'metuka.